My name is Bill Roth. For those of you I have not met, I'm the Minister of Congregational Care here at Myers Park, and welcome to Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, Taking the Next Step. Well, let me talk a little bit about the agenda for tonight. I'm going to reiterate some of the points of the last presentation, just hit the highlights real quickly, and out of the work that Pete has done from his books. I want to talk very briefly about mental health and emotional health, kind of the fit there in my mind. Then I also want to talk about some of the parallels between practicing our faith, practicing physical health, practicing emotional health, because I think there are a lot of parallels that are there. And then Bronah and I are going to introduce some skills, some emotionally healthy skills, 2 more tonight. She and I will model those. You'll have a chance to practice those. We'll debrief around those. There's a chance then for some questions and answers, and then there's some homework we can discuss. And while I'm thinking about it, if you are wanting to be a part of a small group and have not yet signed up, I think there are some small cards that look like this back there on the table. It's still not too late to be a part of a small group, I'm told. And also, if you missed the last presentation, I think it was 2 weeks ago tonight, there are some handouts on the temperature reading, the emotionally healthy skill that was practiced at that meeting. So there's a handout for that as well. So let's go ahead and jump into our topic. If you heard Pete speak, or if you've read his books, then you know this already, but recapping the major bullet points, if you would. There are large parts of our lives that are hidden, unexamined, and unseen by others, but most importantly, unknown by most of ourselves. Pete would say that we live our lives, the image you remember, is like icebergs, and that is that much of who we are is below the waterline. It's not really seen. And he would say it's maybe as much as like an iceberg. 90% is below, only 10% of the iceberg is above the waterline. And what makes this hard to talk about is if you go up to a friend and say, hey, I think there's some old feelings and some old family issues that are kind of getting in the way and impacting your life in a negative way. What are they going to say to you when you approach them in that manner? What feelings? What issues? And it kind of reminds me, this kind of dates me, but it reminds me of that old movie, Young Frankenstein. Any of you remember the old comedy movie, Young Frankenstein? There's a wonderful scene in Young Frankenstein where the young Dr. Frankenstein says to his assistant, Igor, he says, I'm rather a brilliant surgeon. He says, I could help you with that hump. And Igor is down there, and he's got his hump, and he's looking up at him, and he says, what hump? Well, that's kind of what happens when we tell people that we could help them with their emotional issues, or we're going to point them out to us. Nobody ever says, thank you for pointing out that I got some unresolved emotional issues in my past. In fact, why don't I buy you lunch, and you can tell me more about those next week? It just doesn't happen that way. It'd be nice if it did, but most of the time it doesn't go that way. They usually say something along the lines of, what hump, what issues? And the reason we do this is by nature that the things of our past emotional life, our family of origin stuff, a lot of it is difficult or painful. So we tend to kind of push it away. And so we're not very much conscious of it. And so it is what is below the iceberg. That's what the iceberg is made up below the waterline. Stuff that we're not really comfortable thinking about. Feelings we've had that we've not really worked through and processed very well. And so we tend to not claim the power of them or even acknowledge them. And when they get us into trouble, we're not sure what's happened. Other people might see it sometimes, but a lot of times we don't see it. And if we do see it, we deny the impact or how powerful those issues are sometimes. We'll give them a little bit of play, but not say that it's as strong or big an issue as it is. So to really look under the waterline, what I want you to hear tonight, takes great courage and a lot of support. People who are being a part of emotionally healthy spirituality groups, people who are willing to look at their issues, that is a courageous thing. It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of support. So the spiritual journey is a hard journey, and yet it's a very important journey. So Pete would say that we are like human icebergs. We're floating along. We're largely unaware of parts of our lives. And these unaware parts of our lives that are below the waterline are what bump into each other, what we bump into. And they cause havoc in our lives. They wreck other people's lives. They give us a lot of pain. And they keep us from becoming fully mature. So keeping large parts of ourselves below the surface is one way that we keep us from being aware of our pain and our brokenness. But it also keeps us from being fully free and fully alive to be part of the family of God. So in short, our emotions and the resulting behaviors get in the way and they trip us up. They cause us some problems, as Pete says. He had a wonderful way of saying that. If you were here the other night, he said, you know, you can say you're part of the family of God, but Grandpa and Grandma are in the bones, you know? That sense of we all want to be part of the new family of God. We're new creatures in Christ. We want to proclaim that. But our family histories are very strong. They're very powerful, okay? So I want to make a couple points tonight. One of the first points I want to make is that simply professing the Christian faith does not automatically change the influence and power of our past. Would that it did, but our family of origin issues are just too powerful. So these issues, these emotional issues of our past, need focused attention. The second point I'd like to make tonight is that because seeing these issues is difficult and painful, we got to go slow. If you're in a group, if you're leading a group, if you're thinking about diving in and discovering a little bit more about your emotional health and how that impacts your spiritual life, my invitation to you is to be gracious with yourself. If you're a leader, be gracious with those in the group. If you're in a group, be gracious with those around about you, because it takes great courage for all of us to be known by others and even to be known by ourselves. This work of becoming emotionally healthy is sacred work, and it takes time. We go slow, and it takes a lot of courage. So we need a lot of safety. So if you're in a group or if you're working with a partner and you're wanting to become more emotionally healthy and they share that with you and they share with you some issues that they're working on, treat that as sacred material. Treat that as a really sacred trust that they've given you. We need safety. We need grace. All of this to help us overcome the fear of looking at what's below the waterline, if you will, to truly overcome our fear and perhaps our shame about some of our difficult emotions that we're dealing with. So empathy and respect and love are kind of ruling the day of the groups, okay? I love something that Brene Brown tells us about ourselves. She says that every one of us is broken, but we're enough. We're broken, but we're enough. And a lot of times I think we get into either or. Which are we? Are we broken or are we enough? And the answer is yes. We're broken and we're enough. And the two are not really separable. And so if you're in a group and you're thinking about joining a group, you think, well, I'm too broken. It's like, no, being a part of a group is where we need to be when we're broken. And, you know, it's okay because even though we're broken, we're still enough. And that leads me to my third point, which is God knows what's below the waterline. You know, thinking about that iceberg being like our life, God already knows what's below there. It's we who perhaps don't know too much about what's going on below the waterline. God sees us as we truly are, and He loves us. That's the good news. What do we say every morning here at the church when we're doing the prayer of confession? Right after it, we have those words of assurance. Hear the good news. Christ died for us while we're yet sinners. That proves God's love towards us. In the name of Jesus Christ, you are forgiven. We say that after the confession. What we're really saying is God loves us even in our brokenness, and we say that over and over again. So my invitation would be to go slow and respectful with yourselves and others in these groups as you move forward, and to have the ordinary courage, which is a wonderful word. We think of courage as being people who are, you know, military heroes or political heroes or something like that. But all of us need to have ordinary courage, and this is the courage to just slow down, to look at ourselves honestly, to live vulnerably in our lives, to be fully known, to make ourselves fully known to each other. And when I think about this, I think about the prodigal son. I love that parable, that story. The prodigal son, as you remember, he runs off to a far place, and he's there feeding the hogs, and he comes to his senses, and he goes home. And as he goes home, before he even gets close to home, he's a long way off, the scriptures say. The waiting father spots him, and he goes to meet him and greet him. And it's kind of like that in our own lives. Before we even kind of discover what's below the waterline and all the stuff of our family history and origin, we begin that work. Even before we go there and explore that, God's already declared that we're good and He loves us, and it's okay to be who we are in His presence. So the major premise of emotionally healthy spirituality, if I would, is this. It's hard work, but in order to be spiritually mature, we must do the emotional work. See, emotional health and spiritual health go hand in hand. Our emotional health deeply impacts our spiritual health. Think again about the example of Pete's life. He was a pastor for 10, 13, 14 years, something like that. And then he was finding out that he was not doing very well in his own spiritual life, even though he was pastoring a church. And the reason was he had not done the emotional work. He had not slowed down. He was not anchored in some spiritual disciplines. He had not gone back and studied some of his family of origin. For him, it was a lot of workaholism, as you recall. And so he was not being as successful in his own life as he could have been because he hadn't done the emotional work. So being a Christian does not automatically take care of old emotions and feelings. It's kind of like this. If I buy exercise equipment and exercise videos, and I watch tapes on exercise video and yoga, but don't actually do yoga or exercise or get on the treadmill that I buy, it doesn't do any good. So in the same manner, if I'm going to be emotionally healthy, there's certain things I must do. I got to use exercise equipment to be physically healthy. I got to go to the Y, not just join the Y. I actually got to go and work out if I'm going to be healthy. So Pete had failed to be a good father and a pastor for the first part of his ministry, not because he didn't believe in Jesus, but because all he wanted to do was believe in Jesus. He didn't want to do some of the work. He didn't want to practice. So that's where I want to make an analogy with you. I think that our faith calls us to a practice, to certain behaviors and disciplines, to practice emotionally healthy skills, to practice spiritual disciplines, in the same way as our physical health calls us to eat well, to exercise, to do some certain things that will make us be better physically. There's certain things we've got to do. We can't just say it's a good idea to be healthy spiritually. It's a good idea to be healthy emotionally. It's a good idea to be healthy physically, but we don't take any actions towards any of those goals that we have ascended ourselves to. We've acknowledged that they're good goals, but there's no behavior. We call that in the field of counseling goal-directed behavior, and we need to have some of that. And I think what happens is a lot of times we're born anew into the family of God, and we haven't then learned what does it mean to be a part of that family of God. How does this family behave differently than my family of origin? And there's certain ways, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of those exercises that we might want to do that would take us closer to being in a healthy family of God. So just real quickly, I'll say a couple more things, and then we'll shift gears and we'll practice modeling and talking about some exercises that would help us to be more emotionally healthy. I think a lot of us, if we're not careful, we take our Christian faith and then we convert it to fit us, rather than we being converted to the Christian faith. And we use God to bless and justify our behaviors rather than really being changed. So in other words, if we're judgmental, then we go around and God judges everything that we judge. And you know that old saying, if God hates everyone you hate, something's wrong, you know? If God's hating everyone you hate, that's just a little too convenient. There might be something you want to think about there. An example of that in my own life is my dad was an old EUB German. We weren't Methodist growing up. We were EUB. Was there any other EUBs? Have you ever heard of EUBs? Evangelical United Brethren. We're all over the Midwest. We're the German portion of the Methodist Church that merged in 1968. And the German people were kind of rigid, and my dad grew up in a very male-dominated household, and the man was the head of the house and kind of controlling. And that was kind of the background he had as a family. And the thing is about my dad is he just passed it on, but he didn't only just pass it on, he kind of spiritually bypassed. And by that I mean he took this background of controlling German man as the head of the house, and he used spiritual principles to reinforce that behavior in himself. You know, and anytime my mom might challenge him on something, he'd say, nope, what does the Bible say? The Bible says man's the head of the house, and that kind of German duck, duck, duck kind of thing. Well, you know, the problem with that is he was using the Bible to kind of justify his behavior rather than letting the Bible kind of speak to his life in some deeper ways about some of the emotional issues that he had lived through and some of the models he had from his family. So healthy spirituality is being aware of your old emotions and the old family issues, their impact, and you work through that. And the goal is you think about the iceberg with most of it below the water line's here, and the tip stuff's up here, and you got all this down here. The goal would be, for healthy spirituality, would be to flip the iceberg, that more of us is known, which is why we confess our sins in the church. More of us is to be known. That's what it means to be a risk taker and be vulnerable, to share and kind of know who we are. So the goal, I think, of healthy spirituality is kind of flip that iceberg over to the other side and have the tip be below the water. Just a little bit of us not be known and not all of us to be hidden, okay? So that's what I want to say about that. Now, before we go to the next stage, I want to talk about, so what does this mean to take the next step? Because that's kind of nebulous. What might it look like for us to take the next step? I can't answer that for each of you because we're all coming at this from different places. But what I would say is this. For some, it may look like the next step in your emotional health and spirituality is you might want to start becoming a real student of your family history. Start that genealogram. Keep it working. Put it up someplace in your office at home and work on it over time. Gather information from your family and go to reunions. Ask questions. Get to know your family stories. Just like in the Old Testament, there's these wonderful family stories, and they're not sanitized. Do the same with your family history. Get to know your family so that you can become aware of what's below the waterline. That's one thing you might want to do. Another thing, some of you might want to get in individual personal counseling. Many of us have been in counseling. It's a wonderful thing. It's a great way to get to know some of the feelings that we carry around based on what's happened to us in our family of origin, or to work through some difficult emotions around some things that we've had happen in our lives. There's no shame in that. It's a wonderful way of meeting with somebody else, and somebody will walk with us so we don't have to walk alone in the journey. Something else you might want to do is you might want to establish some spiritual disciplines. By this I mean silence, a prayer life, scripture reading, Sabbath keeping, all of these things that would slow us down and force us to kind of be quiet and then let bubble up what's kind of inside of us before God. And not just the prayer that's just asking, talking, petition, but that silence before God. I think if you get quiet, what you'll find is stuff will come to mind that you might need to deal with, and God will reveal himself to us, but it'll also reveal ourselves to us. And I think that's a lot of reasons why I probably resist devotional life and spiritual life, because I don't want to meet the person that I'm going to meet when I go and get quiet. And that's not God, it's me, you know. Anne Lamott has a wonderful kind of quote. She says, "My mind is a bad neighborhood. I try not to go there alone." I love that. My mind is a bad neighborhood, and I try not to go there alone, okay? So it's not enough to read Pete's book. It's not enough to join the choir. It's not enough to come here tonight. If you're going to get some emotional health, what you've got to do is take the next step, find what works for you. Joining a group is good. Learning about your family history, starting the spiritual disciplines, getting in counseling, all these are ways you can move forward in the life of emotional health, okay? All right. I think I'm going to stop now. I'm going to ask Bronah to come. I'm going to introduce her and ask her to come. And what she's going to do is talk a little bit about emotionally healthy skills. Another way we can move forward is not just with the disciplines, the genealograms, and all that kind of stuff, but there are actually skills that when we practice them, we'll get better. It's kind of like when you go on a diet and stay with it, you get better. When you go to the Y and work out, you get better. When you practice these skills, you will get more emotional health in your life. The thing is, you can't come here tonight and do it one time, say, that was interesting, and go home and say, well, that was great. You have to go home and put this someplace, and you have to practice it over and over again until that skill becomes a familiar practice that you actually then begin to use it, okay? Bronah is a dear friend. Bronah is a licensed professional counselor. She works a couple days a week here out of the church. I hope many of you already know her. I hope this is an introduction that that doesn't need to be made because you know her. But she's a delight, and I'm so glad that she's come to be a part of the program tonight. Bronah, would you come and talk to us about stop mind reading and talk to us about that and how that applies?
Sure. Thank you, Bill. I can't see you. How about that? I want to start this segment of skill practice with a question. So think about this. When you notice somebody saying something or doing something or not saying something or not doing something, how many of you read their mind and figure out what that person in that moment is thinking or feeling? Let's see a show of hands here. Oh, look around. Awesome. We have lots of mind readers, right? Yeah, and you notice my hand was up. I was joining the crowd. Okay, so mind reading is something that we do. Now, of those people who raised their hand, how many of you are good at this? How many of you are good at it? You think you're pretty sure you're good at it. Oh, look at that. The hands aren't going up. Mine went up. I used to think I was great at it until I had some wonderful help with friends and loved ones who helped me know that I was not very good at it. And that's emotional growth there when I find out that I'm really not good at it. So our first skill tonight says stop, for those of you who haven't stopped yet, stop mind reading and start clarifying the assumptions you make about other people. Stop doing it. Now, I have to admit, usually I can't just stop it completely. I notice I'm doing it, and then I shift gears and I get my assumptions clarified. I can't always stop that initial reaction to mind read. In some of his books, Peter Scazzero reminds us that God is the only one who's omniscient, and that is really bad news for us, right? Because he's the only one who really knows everything, so he gets to mind read because he is accurate, he is good at it, and we're not always, or in fact, I find out I'm not usually very good at it. And yet we often play God. Something happens, and we make up stories, or we try to make up the truth, and what we do is we make an assumption and then we don't verify the facts. Who should we verify the facts with? Yeah, it doesn't count if I go to my friend and say, what do you think? When he did this, do you think what he really was thinking was, that doesn't count. I need to verify the facts with the person I'm making the assumption about. So, let me give you an example of what happens when you mind read. And by the way, I think Bill particularly, I need to tell you this, my husband did give me permission to share this one, so if you know him, don't worry, he's cool with this. We've been married a long time, and in the beginning years, I did lots of mind reading. I prided myself on it. So one of my favorite mind reading moments was lots of times we would have discussions, and sometimes those discussions would turn into heated discussions, and sometimes those would turn into heated arguments, and we could really keep it going. And somewhere in the midst of all that, my dear husband would go like that. And I would read his mind immediately and say to myself, oh, he's over there thinking, oh my goodness, she is too much trouble. She is high maintenance. She's not worth this effort. I want out of here. What did I do with that mind reading moment? I felt hurt. I'm too much for the man I love. Oh my goodness. I feel hurt, and pretty soon the only part of hurt I'm feeling is the anger part. And I have some great comments to make to him about what I just figured out he's thinking. Or one of my favorite things to do was I would just skulk away and give him the silent treatment for a while, because after all, that really works, doesn't it, to give people the silent treatment. Well, finally, one day, and I didn't know about Peter, so I just happened upon this idea. One day, after we'd had an argument, I said, you know, Bill, this morning when we were arguing, and you did this, I think you were thinking that I'm too much for you. I'm not worth it. You might as well cut and run. Is that right? And Bill paused for a minute, and he got real scrunched up in his face. He was trying to remember, and he said, oh, oh, I remember that moment, but no, that's not what I was thinking. You weren't too much for me. I felt like I wasn't enough for you. I couldn't be the good husband you wanted me to be, and that just tore me up inside. I couldn't take it. So my mind reading for a long time caused me unnecessary pain and confusion and anger and hurt and disconnection. And yet, when I clarified my assumption with him, I found out I wasn't even close. So mind reading is something we want to stop, and we want to start clarifying our assumptions. If I do it, you do it, everybody does it, and it's not healthy, why do we do it? What makes that so commonplace? Anybody want to take a guess at that? Why do we do that? Yeah. You feel like you have more control. This difficult situation is taking place, and if I can just figure out why and what's going on, then man, I can control it. Yeah, because Bill, I can lash out, I can sneak away, I can protect myself. Yeah. Anything else? Sometimes often, we can come into a relationship with assumptions from the past. See, I don't just do this with my husband. I think I started this at a very young age. Most of us will make assumptions as children about life, won't we? And we take these children's assumptions into our adult relationships. And then, when my husband goes like this, hey, that fits the assumption I've had for a long time that when I'm needy, I'm too much trouble, right? So that fits. So that's the mind reading I'm going to do. And the reality is, if I give him a chance, he might be able to rewrite that old assumption that little girl made. But not if I don't clarify my assumption with him. So it's really, really a good next step in our emotional health journey to be able to stop the mind reading, catch yourself in the middle of it, and instead clarify what you're assuming about this person. Okay, you have a handout, so let's take a look at that. In just a moment, you're going to be doing this activity, but first Bill and I are going to model it for you. And you notice, let's look at the key point first. It says at the top, this is the one that says stop mind reading. Everybody have that one? Okay. Key point, never assume you know what a person is thinking or feeling. If you feel an assumption coming on, don't buy it, clarify it. Okay? Don't blame that little phrase on Peter. I did that one, so I just wanted something I could remember. So don't buy into your own imagination. Clarify it with the person that you have the assumption about. Notice there's an individual activity section and a partner activity section. So in role-playing this, what I will say is I've already read the individual section, and I have thought about relationships, and I've picked one that's a friendship that I have. And so if I were doing this, I would write my friend John's name down on this paper. And once I know this is somebody I want to clarify and practice clarifying an assumption with, of course, John's not here tonight, so I'll pick somebody in the audience. Bill, I think I'll pick you. Surprise, surprise. And Bill and I are just going to role play this, and so hang on, because you're going to be doing this in just a minute. Okay. So Bill, I have this friend named John that we go hiking with a lot. Would you be willing to, and this is how I'd like you to do it too, would you be willing to role play him so I
Sure.
can practice?
That'd be fine.
Okay. So you're John. John, you know last weekend when we all went hiking and it was a long way, so we had to drive, we took turns driving. I remember when I got behind the wheel, you started making a lot of jokes about my driving. And so I read your mind. I felt like you were thinking that I'm a lousy driver and that you would be scared silly to ever drive with me again. Is my assumption correct?
Gosh, I'm really glad you brought that up, Bronah, because no, actually, you know how guys are. They like to tease. That's the way we connect. and we use humor a lot of times. And so everybody was kind of tired, and we're getting ready to go, and I was just trying to connect and make light and kind of lighten the mood and stuff like that. And I had no idea you were taking me seriously, so I'm really glad you checked out Assumption because, you know, I think you're a really good driver, actually, and I was just trying to joke and make fun and kind of lighten the mood.
Thank you. That's really helpful because that's so different from what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'm glad I checked.
Yeah.
Now, after you do one practice, then switch it so that he can have a turn too.
So I'm going to do the same thing. I've already done the individual activity. I've considered an area. It's a work relationship. I've picked a place where I've been making an assumption, and it turns out this assumption is with a real person named Bronah, which is sitting right here. So this is something about our work relationship here that I wanted to check out with her, that I realized the other day I was making a lot of assumptions that I probably needed to check out. So, Bronah, do I have permission to read your mind or check out an assumption with you?
Yes.
Thank you. Bronah, I think that you think doing the Marriage Matters workshops that we do twice a year is really fun and that you want to just keep doing them. And I just assume that that's what you think about that you really enjoy them and you want to keep doing them. Is that correct?
You know, it really is. And I don't know that I've ever really shared that with you. But in this case, your assumption is correct that I really do enjoy. And I actually like that you keep putting me on the docket instead of, you know, checking in every time because I feel like we're a team in that.
Good. Well, thank you, because I felt like really bad the other day. I was realizing I was making dates for the next workshop and stuff like that and just assuming Bronah will be there doing these and stuff like that. I wasn't really checking out, does she want to do them? Do these dates work? And I need to do a better job of kind of clarifying, you know, my assumptions with you around that work matter.
Okay. Sounds good. That's it, guys. One practice each. Let me stop there. Questions about that so far? Does that make sense to you? So the first part of this you need to do on your own. Once you get the relationship, the assumption you've made that you wish you could clarify with that person. If the person's sitting beside you and it's about them, great. But otherwise, find somebody in here that would be willing to role play that person with you. And you practice and then switch roles. Okay? See how that goes. Thanks.